that Cal Newport's able to do that. He has other revenue, right? Other than just his W-2 income. And that gives some flexibility from this. This is like a little business in the sense that like the amount of work that it takes is that level.
Big time. I just messaged Steve. Cal's funny. Cal's been mentioning on that Deep Questions podcast of his, he's like, he wants to be revenue neutral or income neutral for his podcast ventures. So he's gonna start putting some ads in. He's already doing it. He did an ad for like perhaps Squarespace or one of those companies.
Yeah, the model, I really appreciate. He's not the first person that I've seen do that model, but I think he's an example of a really good model of building an online community and then leveraging it to the next level continuously, right? So he built his blog, leveraged it to a book deal, built the book deal, leveraged it to the next book deal, up, and then continued his blog the whole time. And then now he's leveraging that community. I mean, it's kind of a nice, it reminds me of Atul Gawande in that sense that he has his main job, which is to be a doctor, but then he also has a side job as a writer. He's like a full-time staff writer with The Atlantic, right? And it's like that to me is a really powerful, I like that model. I think it's a good model for being able to generate ideas and basically save, becoming a creator to save other people time, right? So the idea, like basically as you train yourself, like as we train ourselves, we learn all this stuff about the material. But if I'm not writing, basically the only person that's benefiting from that material is myself, right? And it doesn't have to be writing. I mean, last week we talked about content creation, and I agree with you that really, really high content, quality video is as hard, if not harder, than the writing process. But the process of making high quality video is, I think there's a higher barrier to entry than the process of writing, right?
Yes, big time. Unless, yeah.
Because we can make low quality video or the highest quality video that the production mechanism that we have permits. But my feeling is like it's so much easier, and the process of writing actually, I think, to do high quality video, you actually have to write in the background before you shoot, right? Like
especially if we're going to be respectful of the time, every second of our audience.
What's up, Steve?
Hey guys, how you guys doing?
Well, is this your office space?
Yeah, it's in the works, but it's just an empty room with some desks. Yeah. Although yours, it looks like a really professional setup. It looks really nice.
4 weeks.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's some desk goals right there, or some office goals.
Yeah, this. I'm excited about this. I think I'm going to be able to do. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how the year goes. Should we do, how are we, I had the thing up and running, but I didn't check it yet. How are we doing?
All good. We could do an overview of the agenda, and then we can go into our catch up. And one thing I discussed with Steve was, Jeff, you recognize the idea of reaction videos. I think it'd be cool to play the first minute and a half of your CMC cube talk and then do a reaction on that. Because I'm coming on this realization that everything that I'm consuming related to pedagogy or even music, if I just channel it into being productive and channel it into how I learn in my CS courses, it's really, really powerful. And I can definitely do that because in the beginning of that talk, your audience are instructors, but I think there are some things that you say throughout that presentation that students can directly channel in how they approach what they do or what they don't do in their courses. Sure. So we can create a little reaction video. I think that would be kind of cool.
You don't have to teach me what that means, but I'm down.
All it means is literally we'll just share the screen. I'll share the screen of you speaking for the first minute and a half in your presentation, and then I'll stop the share, and then we can just have a discussion about what it is that you said and how students can apply what you said, even though it's directed towards instructors, but towards their own courses.
Sure.
But first,
oh, I was wondering, like, is there any way you can move your microphone a little bit closer? It sounds a bit muffled, I think.
Or both of us, or Jeff?
No, because I thought it was my computer that was a problem, but I can hear Henry fine. But for Jeff, it just sounds a little bit like muffled.
I mean, I could do. You know, one of the
I mean,
things-
it's okay, but I just didn't know if it.
No. I really appreciate that.
I think Jeff's mic is on his webcam.
Yeah, but I have another one that's ready to go.
You kept your blue one at in your office, Jeff?
I have the blue one at my other office. Let's see.
Yeah, I think you just expand the mute button.
What about
then-
this one? Is this better?
Yeah, that's fine. I can hear better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Let's try one. What about this one? Is that better?
Oh, I like this one.
Yeah, this one should be better. I think the best.
Okay. Okay, great. So before we get into catch up, let's just take a brief overview of the. So following up on last week's to-dos, getting some of the categories of what types of blogs there are to be potentially written. Steve's first blog on TLC. Jeff's YouTube brainstorming kindling document. I think we should have a conversation of what the distinction between building trust and friendship and what that means in our writing, in our media. I think that's important. My next blog on the obscurity of autonomy. And then that's pretty much it. The various media to support our blog, I think that doesn't have to be today. So, and I think we're working on it right now.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Steve, you want to tell us a little bit about your week?
Oh.
And
yeah. So I got to do a pretty thorough kindling of the first 4 chapters of Getting What You Came For. And I know I had shared it with Henry, and I think this kind of set me on a roller coaster for the week, because I remember I tried reading this book in the past, but it made me a little too anxious. And I kind of just like stopped reading it. But this time I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do kindling. And I got that same overwhelming, like, anxious feeling. And I started like doubting myself. I know Henry saw some of my like comments where I was just like, oh man, like if I'm gonna plan to start my PhD at 26, I might get out at like 34. Like, how am I gonna have kids? How am I gonna get a girlfriend or even a wife? Because I always hear so many difficult things about PhDs. So I think there's a theme of, or at least in my kindling document, it started getting pretty pessimistic. I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna lean toward this. I like started getting more discouraged. But then the next day, I highlight, I'm like, after a couple of days of like staying away from that and just like absorbing it all, I'm like, okay, no, I still want to do it, but I gotta recognize and like that thought comes up often. And I don't know, I don't want fear to deter me from something that I want to do. But I noticed that, and I think it's important to pay attention to that. And also, I think because I was getting overwhelmed with like, oh, I got to get some research in and this, but I've been looking a lot online and just on the UC Davis website for a bunch of like resources and undergraduate scholar like research programs. And I know that you could do an undergraduate thesis when you graduate. So I'm like trying to set myself up for that. Yeah. And I've been like reading all the research that they offer now and just like all the requirements and stuff that they expect the students to know. So I've kind of been making like, this quarter I want to take advantage of it, but there's so many things I have to do. Although I was taking this math class, but it's kind of, I think I learned a lot of it from the intro to abstract math. So I don't know if I'm going to continue with it because it's kind of just a review for me. but I know that just from reading what I needed for the research, I need to get my Python skills up, and I need to learn probably some latex. So I'm thinking maybe I want to switch over, put some more attention to that. But also, I do want to get my time more focused into scholarship writing. So yeah, and then there's just so many resources in the UC Davis website, but you really got to spend like time going through like a bunch of different things. So there's a lot of potential out there. There's a lot of pitfalls, but just take a day at a time. And I just don't want to make brash decisions one day. Like I know if I get like some anxiety about like getting to my PhD, like give me yourself a couple of days to think about it, and then hopefully I'll like not let the anxiety overwhelm me at the moment. But yeah, so I'm feeling pretty good, optimistic.
Can I make some comments on that, or Steve, maybe Henry, you had something you wanted? Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Okay, so two things that I want to say, and so one thing that's probably worth, this book is worth getting, I think.
Yeah, I ordered it.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so that's one thing, and then this book we will eventually bring in here. So strategically, I would recommend when you do your research on which PhD program you're going to go to, look for the option of getting a master's degree as part of the PhD program, and then recognize and then ask up front before you commit, ask all the questions. How does the master's degree process work? When does that happen in my process? Do I have to pay for it? Blah, blah, blah. Get all of that so that you as part of your PhD program, you're having the option to matriculate with your master's, which means if you were to decide later on, hey, I don't want to, it gives you an out basically, right?
Yeah.
Plan for the worst, plan for the worst, and then do your best to make the best happen. But I think one of the things that some students get into is they get into their PhD program, they make no plans to get their master's degree. The going gets tough later in their program, and then they leave with nothing, right? And that all happens up front when you're doing your research on that. The other thing that I would say is so the reason that this book is really important is because it talks about the science of decision making. And I think one strategy that I might use, or that I would suggest you use, is instead of thinking about this reading as making the commitment to do your PhD program, think about this reading as collecting information so you can make a better decision. Right now, the end result may or may not be the same, right? But like, PhD is a huge commitment, no?
Yeah.
And if you put the pressure on yourself now while you're reading that, like there's too much emotional, I mean, for me, that it's almost like your own high pressure salesman, right? You go to a car dealership, sign here, come on, sign here. And that, to me, that's not, I wouldn't recommend reading that book in that way. What I recommend is let that book be a fact-finding mission, so that when you get to a place to make that decision, and it doesn't sound like you're going to be there, you have to be there anytime in the next year, certainly, right? Mm-hmm. But hopefully even maybe 3 years, if you take that full-time at UC Davis, like by the time you get to that place, you have so much more information, and you're very, very slowly putting together a resume, a track record that will allow you that option. So it's almost like an opt-in. It's an information collection session, a long one. It's taking a long time to read it, so that when you get to the place that you want to take advantage of it, you're able to make that decision for yourself, right? And in the worst case scenario, so I remember at one point I got that book for somebody, and they read it, and then they're like, you know what, I don't want to do my PhD. What a good use of time, right?
Yeah.
To get to a place where you're like, like even if that cost you 4 months of thinking, like that's 5 years of your life, right? Mm-hmm. And then the third thing that I'll say is the standard, one of the gifts that I hope to give you, ustedes, plural you, is a reimagination or a recognition that you can actually find ways to sustain yourself. I wouldn't plan to be rich necessarily, but certainly make a living for yourself and generate the capacity to have other income streams at some point in your career, which many PhD students don't actually know about, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I think And so the question that I would immediately ask, like, I would put this on the back burner, right? But what can I do so I can have a comfortable, not a rich life, right?
Yeah.
But a comfortable life in my PhD program, so that I get placed in my desired job right out of the box, and so that I'm building the type of assets that I would want in the long term as part of my program, right? Those things may or may not be part of the way you negotiate entrance to the program. The institution that you eventually go to doesn't have to know about any of your side hustles.
Mm-hmm.
What they need to know is that you are doing you're committed to the program, that you're a good student, that you know what you're doing, and et cetera, et cetera. They don't need to know. If you decide that you trust them enough to tell them about that, and you think that you could leverage those relationships as a professional development tool, then great. But that, you remember we talking about that last week, that Steve makes, or Henry, or you make the school doesn't make you.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that a lot of times students get trapped in, they'll read all those requirements and they'll think, oh my God, I have to do it this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I would actually, in your own mind, maybe renegotiate that. What are the things that you want out of it? And so it sounds like one of the things that you want out of it is the ability to support your family, right?
Yeah.
The ability not to be, poor or like, basically you want the ability to like start your life, right?
Yeah.
And then it also sounds like you would like I don't know this, but implicit in that is you'd like the ability that after you finish your PhD program, you'd like to be able to be placed in your first job, like a full-time job. So you remember that document you made of your goals?
Of what I wanted from my undergraduate degree, or yeah.
One thing I might do is I might actually split that into a few different documents, because that document that I read actually had 2 or 3 different horizons of focus. It had the project level horizon. So you had stuff that you were going to do this year. It had like 3-year project level horizons, which means your education, and it had an 8-year, and then it had like a global one. And I would partition those. So like in the global one, that's where I would write these major ticket items, right? Like, have enough money during my PhD program to pay off my loans as an undergraduate, to have enough money to support myself, be able to support a family, land in my job. Those are major ticket items, right?
Yeah.
And then the separate project level items are the things that you do to get through that. And so like, that's where when you go dating, it's almost like a dating game, right? Like you're going to apply to PhD programs, maybe more than one, probably. Yeah. I hope not too many, but certainly more than one. And then you're going to ask them questions about what they have to offer. And as you ask them questions, one of the things that you want to, like, if you have these things in the background, you can strategically vet the different options and different support structures at each institution that best align with your desires out of that program, right?
Wait, could you repeat that last part?
So basically, like, as you write these things, so if we think about the mindset, this is upward management, right?
Yeah.
This goes back to our conversation 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago. Like, the things that you want, the institution is blind to all that. So too is the book that you're reading, right?
Yeah.
That book is just filled with information on shit you have to do.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times when people read that, they get tunnel vision, right? They like start thinking about all the shit that they have to do. And like, oh, yes, sir. Like, let me get those done. But on the backside, like, that whatever school gets you, Steve, is going to be lucky to have you.
Yeah.
Like, you're as much of an asset to them as they are, if not more so. And so one of the things that, as you write these things out, that is a directive for you. It gives you insights into the type of questions that you can ask that institution before you actually make the commitment, so that you have, due diligence. You've really thought deeply, and you've asked the questions of the institution. So when you get there, you have a chance to meet some of those needs, rather than just thinking like, oh, I'm going to go there and follow exactly what they have to say and then be done with it, right?
Yeah.
So what did you hear?
It's a lot, but I basically, I have my own needs, and that doesn't necessarily kind of align with the needs or with the needs of the university or like the book. And so I have to keep those in mind while I'm applying to the university and also reading this book, because it's not necessarily like a blueprint for me. But I mean, that's the gist of it. I think, I don't know, there was a lot in that. So, yeah.
One of the things I heard was collecting information so that we can make a better decision. It reminds me of one of our first conversations, Jeff, that we had on what scholarship writing is. And just this morning, I spent 2 hours with Balaram on drafting his statement of purpose. We're trying to actually make some distinctions on his research statement versus his personal statement versus his statement of purpose. The reality is so much of that writing is persuasive writing. But what Jeff's insight was in that process is every minute that we spend, or every minute that you have spent, Steve, on doing that research of what it means to get the most out of your education can really act as a potential compass when times do get tough. And meaning to say, even if you don't get into this graduate institution, or if you don't get this scholarship, the time that you had invested in collecting that information and turning that information into your own writing will provide you value. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I love, Stephen King has a book called On Writing. It's a great one. I've read that book probably 4 times. And he has the story, the author Stephen King, the guy that wrote It and Shawshank Redemption. So he has this, do we tell a story about the pin? I think we did, right? When he was, he was a teacher for a bit, and he was submitting small articles to anyone, like Playboy, I mean, you name it, he was submitting it, right? And he would collect rejection letters. And at one point they were on the wall in a pin. And at one point the rejection letters got so heavy that the pin fell down. And obviously he didn't want to get rejected, but the point was every rejection is an attempt. And so then he would go back and he'd try again, and he'd like different story, different time. And then eventually he hit, and that's Mark Asmar, the guy I interviewed, he calls that the pain period. I mean, he was really teaching himself how to write, and he was doing it while he was getting paid to do other stuff. And then he landed his first article, and then another article, and then eventually he landed a book, and then, and then another book, and then all of a sudden now he's like a, multi, some ridiculous number of millionaires, which is a different story completely, right? But the point of that is that like every failed scholarship is like, I didn't think about it as a failure. I thought about it as a success. I just hadn't convinced the people to give me money yet, right?
Yeah.
That's actually quite similar to exam anxiety, getting the right answer versus how much we learned in that process of the prep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's identical to exam corrections. The issue, yeah, I mean, that's literally how exam corrections are designed, right? They're really designed with learning in hand. The nice thing about, from the standpoint of pedagogical approach, is that exam corrections leverage the power of instructors to benefit student learning, right? But from the standpoint of the student, when you can't make those decisions pedagogically, it literally is Daniel Coyle's deliberate practice mechanism. Right? It's slowing down and compartmentalizing and focus on each individual error, correcting those errors, and then trying again. It's just in athletic development, a single attempt might take millisecond, right? Same thing true with a violin. Like, how long does it actually take to pull the strings across a violin? Okay, but imagine one pull is a full scholarship submission. Right? So that's like 40 hours of work or something like that. And so it's just like, it's a different time frame of scope, but the reflection that happens on the back end of that is identical. It's just happening on a different time scale. And that's what that plan, act, reflect cycle, it's literally, that's the science of learning supports that concept, that when we make mistakes, we reflect on those mistakes and we try again, and then we correct, and that's why it's so important to just get skin in the game, so to speak, like submit them, do the best that you can through the submission. And then when things go well, think about why they went well. Also what would you change? When things don't go well, why did they not go so well? What would you change? What did you do well, right? And eventually the more you throw arrows at the dartboard, some of them are going to hit, right?
I want to address that in my...
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say that's exactly what I want to address in my next post, which is the other day I was observing some skateboarders practice skateboarding at this elementary school, and it was amazing just the collaboration and feedback and coaching that was happening, and they're all like really younger kids. And what was interesting about that process was the issue with having so much autonomy when it comes to understanding a theorem, for example, or understanding some STEM concept, is so much of that is hidden and so much of that is done on our own. So it's like we actually do have a ton of autonomy in that regard. And I think that's why Conquering College was birthed. But so yeah, there's a lot there.
Isn't it incredible once you, at one point, my brother played soccer at a really high level, and I always kind of wanted to play with him. And at one point in grad school, I was conscious of these ideas, and I went to go play with him, and I realized all success, everything, anytime that somebody's good at something, it goes back to these principles. Like I understood these principles in my math career, but I was able to translate, because I could actually talk about the skills that I was using. I could translate that onto a soccer field and use the metacognitive processes to play with college athletes. I trained for like 3 months. I wasn't great. Like obviously you can't do in 3 months what a college athlete would do in like 15 years of training, right? But you could fake it. And that's a question that I would have you. Isn't it amazing that you're watching young skateboarders, the same shit you're doing in your CS classes, these guys are doing on the board? It's like, yeah, I mean, yeah. That's the goal of Conquering College, right? Is to show the how. It's to, like, one, identify the principles underneath, so you have a consciousness of the principles happening. So what is deliberate practice? How does it relate to myelination of nerve fibers in the brain? Why is that important? How does it work? And then once you have the principles there, relate practices that, like so many of my practices. So for example, Steve, like I have like 15 things I want to tell you about developing projects, literally, because for the last 15 years, I've been working on that. And I could tell you in like 10, 15 minutes, and you already got the idea last week, right? Those practices took me years of failure. Whereas like for somebody that's activated, for somebody that's ignited, I would call you ignited using Daniel Coyle's words, right? You have the ignition. So you recognize like there's a part of your brain that is actively asking like, how do I manage time? And now all of a sudden a practice comes in that represents 10 years of failure, right? And so you can say like, oh my God, that practice solves my problem. Let me try it out for a bit. And it literally like, you don't have to fail in order to benefit from the failure, right?
Yeah.
And that's really the vision of the learning code, that if you expose people and get them conscious of the learning principles so that they understand what's happening in their brain, and then also give them access to a bunch of really high-powered practices that align with the principles so that they're conscious of what's happening underneath. Literally, you're showing them how to do deliberate practice in the CS classes or in the math classes so that they're not having to generate that on their own. Which means you have like, the idea is it gives them a template to start with, rather than like right now, the way that our system works is the only way that a lot of students get updates is when they fail. But how many students actually have the wherewithal to repeatedly fail enough to design the systems, right?
Yeah, not a lot.
Yeah. So anyways, let me shut up on that. So so let me ask you this. So synopsis, give me a synopsis of what you just heard from the standpoint of your.
Okay. Oh, every time you tell me things, I just think of it in like sports terminology, I guess. So I guess like what you're saying is kind of just like that, like why it's important for NBA teams. Like even though they might not play veteran players as often, they do have them because, or they have some of them because like they have to teach the rookies like what it's like, even if it's not related to basketball, just like on travel, nutrition, dieting, like financial management, like because they probably made the mistakes themselves. And so the rookies don't necessarily have to make all those mistakes, like if they can get it from someone else, they could kind of skip that gap. So I mean, that's what I got from them.
Steve, remember when you were drafting the what, why, how for Steve Learning Math or Steven's school blog post?
Yeah.
Do you remember how many times I said the how component is conquering college and we should expand on the how as we get better at doing that type of documentation?
Yeah.
Because that's exactly that, right? So when I think about our TLC posts versus our more technical posts that are related to the subjects that we're studying, if we're serious about bringing our peers up and with us as we get guidance from Jeff, an immediate way to help them is to show the how through some of that documentation about our processes. Right? Doesn't have to be blog form. I mean, it can be through conversation, but there's something about having it documented where it could be accessed where others, I mean, we don't have infinite hours in a day, right?
Plus, I think it's interesting, like if we can have the opportunity to even apply it to things that aren't specifically on what we would cover, like say like skateboarding or some random passion that you have, because I think that's also, that could act as a hook for just learning in general.
Yeah, I've had so many conversations with Jeff on how he approaches math, or witnessing how he approaches math has helped me in so many other areas in my life. Whether it started at Nordstrom's, I was like, hey, the way I don't know, treat my customers or talk to my customers is related to how you talk about math or how I learn how to prepare produce at In-N-Out is similar to the way that you approach deriving from first principles.
It's yeah. It's crazy once that happens, right? Like the so should we transition? Do you feel that you got so what are the takeaways, Steve? If you were thinking about your takeaways.
Takeaways. I think for me, my biggest I think bottleneck was just kind of that I felt like as I'm reading the book, I had to commit to the idea like I'm going to do this PhD and I have to do all these things, and that was pretty stressful for me. But I mean, I say like this kind of like building the second brain. This is just like collecting information, and then you can make a more informed decision later on. That like takes a lot of the pressure off. Yeah, and I think just me trying to focus on getting like either like an undergraduate senior thesis or like more localized things also takes off the pressure. Yeah, so just like smaller steps, and then maybe then I'll figure out the PhD. But it's good that I have the information about it early on.
Awesome. So the last thing I'll say, and then Henry, I'd love to hear from you. One of the reasons that I'm so serious about blogging is one, it's like we were talking, Henry, it's a lower barrier to entry. To produce really, really high written content takes less investment, in my opinion, from the standpoint of actual technology than really, really high quality production value video, right? The second reason is, if you think about the academic work, all professional researchers are also professional writers, right? And I would also say for people who are going to be thought leaders in education, and I believe you two can be thought leaders for sure. I'm not sure whether or not I'm past my formally speaking, they say I only have 5 years left, right? 40, not if they say if you're 40, over 40, you're pretty much fucked. And so I got like 5 years of good thinking left, right? But like, if the idea is that you guys are going to finish your PhD, learning and your thesis and all that stuff, learning how to write is really important. So the way that I think about the blog process is it's not orthogonal. It's like skew parallel, right? So like they're not identical. Mathematical writing or CS writing is not identical to blog writing, but it's also not orthogonal to it, right? Like the writing systems that you're going to develop, that we as a team, all three of us are developing in posting blogs, you know, consistently month after month, year after year, and like processing and collecting information, those same systems are directly transferable for the PhD, which will decrease your cognitive load. When you're thinking about taking on the PhD process, you're basically partitioning your cognitive load into technical specific information and writing, and you're front loading the writing part, which will give you a competitive edge, not only in the PhD process, but also afterwards. Like you guys, if you're going to teach classes, you're going to be creating curriculum. Maybe you guys want to publish textbooks. Maybe you want to publish YouTube videos. Like all of that stuff depends on systems of creation, right? And so that's one of the reasons that I also think it's really, really important. Like the sooner you guys start that development, the more opportunity you'll have to fail by the time you're actually going to kick that into gear, right?
Yeah.
So Henry.
Hey, no, I agree. I was watching some of Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety this morning when I was eating, and I thought to myself, if she had the media presence that she has now, but without any of her written content, I don't think she would actually be able to have the media presence that she has now. And that goes along with so many of the authors that we've brought into our conversation. So if we define writing as our way to sharpen our thinking and reading abilities, then that is definitely way more transferable than making attention grabbing videos at this stage. So it's kind of like having the curriculum or having the book and then building support on it, or just building support for like piloting forever these support resources, right?
And the sad thing, like what we really should do is find somebody that knows how to make attention grabbing resources and get them on the team, right? Because then it wouldn't have to be a either or. I'm not claiming that at this point in my career, that I've launched a ton of well edited written work, but I have been writing on a daily basis for about 12 years, right? 2010 is when I really started that. Yeah, I guess 21 minus 12 is not 10, but yeah. But it's like, I'm not against the idea of producing really good videos. It's just, I'm so early in that stage that, and like, I can pretty much guarantee your PhD thesis advisor and institution is not going to give you a thesis when you produce a really, really sexy video. Right? Yeah. So it's just like, I think more on that later. But talk to me, Henry. Sorry.
No, that order makes sense for sure. It's harder for me, obviously, because I've been doing research on videos, I guess, informally for, I don't know, 20 years. And I've just gone to, like, the first book I finished was the first book that we read together, How Learning Works, right? Like literally, that is literally the first book I finished. So that's why I see so many things that we can do in video, because I've been kindling what videos mean for such a long time. That's all. But
yeah,
the sequencing makes sense.
And no, but bring that though, right? Because that's the beautiful thing about a collaboration. Like bring that into, like, and I honestly, like, you guys are in a different, how can we prepare for a future that we don't even know? And my personal belief is that as time goes on, video is going to be more and more important. It's just the titanic shift. Like 2005 was YouTube, right? 2006 or 2007 was the iPhone. So we've only had society-wise, we've only had like 15 years where the average person could produce a video. So I don't think the entire institution of education, nor the entire culture of our society has really gotten their heads around this. And this is like, we still have the chance to be early adopters. It's taking off for sure. Like I didn't start my YouTube account in 2005, sadly, right? but like, this is not 2060, right? And so I think from that standpoint, like, keep pushing that, Henry, keep pushing it. Like, I agree with that completely. It's just like, that's going to be something that you're pushing the boundaries on, and then we're catching up to, right? And I think it is super important. It's just it's a dimension that I don't have as much insight to, that at this point, I don't think that the institutions have caught up to, but that's a great way. You know how institutions change? People on the fringes make really, really good developments that catch people's attention, right?
One last thing I'll say on this topic is, when I hear Newport or other authors talk about cognitive fitness and their ability to concentrate, as I'm just developing what it means to read, I mean, I literally feel myself, like, I think Steve's actually read a lot more than I have. Steve and I've had a few one-on-one conversations about just how much he's read in the past. But I mean, if we're serious about this work, like, we got to get in front of students, right? Full-time positions. And there are ways that I am exercising cognitively in reading that is more transferable to me succeeding in my coursework versus me, even with full intentionality, studying video or studying YouTubes. So yes, this is the right move for sure.
Awesome. So Henry, do you have stuff to check? I'd love to hear how it's going for you.
Pretty good. I have a deadline at 4:30 that I'm thinking about, but I'll survive. It's those assignments. It's literally like, it just takes forever. I remember you describing your really painful experience, Jeff, where you ultimately had to kind of like phone a friend who you helped in some math portion of it, but he had to help you in the programming. I feel like I'm having to phone a friend, 20 friends for each programming assignment. So hopefully, as I develop more agency over time, I won't have to rely on so many people's help.
When you ask others questions, they get stronger. So recognize that when you're seeking tutoring, you are actually giving a gift to the person that is tutoring you. I mean, that doesn't mean not to be appreciative of their time and et cetera, but like so many students get caught in that, like, oh yeah, sorry, I'm asking you this question, but like, when they have to explain it to you, their concept images are they're re-triggering the pathways and remyelinating those connections, right?
One last thing I just thought about is, there's a series on Netflix called The Playbook, and they feature coaches. So like Doc Rivers and some other coaches. One episode was, his name is Patrick. Last name starts with an M, and he's Serena Williams' coach, and he coaches 40 players who are top 100 in tennis. And he actually shared that he had to go to therapy and see a psychologist for over a year when he was in high school before he was able to say a single word in those sessions. And then what he said that really stuck out with me is that so many people labeled him with having a weakness, but now when he looks back on it, he reflects that sometimes our biggest weaknesses can turn into our greatest strengths. So I personally feel my biggest weakness is being able to learn technical concepts at this stage in my life. But I also recognize for sure hella students are struggling learning technical concepts. If I just look at the major spread of undergraduate students at San Jose State, many of them aren't even in the program, right? So I can't wait to turn it into a strength.
And you're doing that, right? When your mind is now, like, I would say you are fully ignited. The issue, like, so if we the little book of talent talks about ignition, maintenance, and grit, basically, right? So how do you become excited about something? Once you're excited, how do you maintain the discipline on a daily basis? And then long term, like, what are the practices to actually do that? And then, like, the issue of becoming a champion in something, or like one of the top performers, is you gotta maintain that for like year after year, decade after decade, right? And the good news is that I tend to believe that first step is by far the hardest, from the standpoint of once you're ignited, every single moment of every single day is an opportunity to maintain, and then the long-term processes are there, right? And so I think one of the things, like a trap that I see that you get, that I hear you, is you're ignited, but your internal metric is like 10 years ahead of the actual physical stage that you're in, and you're like comparing, like, why can't I do, right? But what I would say is, like, recognize that you have done, the fact that you're even thinking that way is a huge testament to your strengths, and exactly what you're saying, I agree with. Now that you're focused on this, the sky is the limit, because what will happen is there are some students that aren't even conscious that they've done this stuff. And so they're just kind of like, this is one, you remember I was telling you that I would choose you guys 12 days out of 7? Because a lot of times when somebody is privileged from a very young age, they're not necessarily conscious of the privileges that they have. And that's a really scary thing when they become a teacher.
Yeah.
It's okay if they're going to, like, if they're going to become a world-class researcher and get paid to be that and not have to care about their teaching so much, that's great, because then they can be as productive as possible. Like, I do take issue with the idea that nominally those people are sometimes called professors, right? Because they're not professors. Depends on how you define professorship, but like in terms of the amount of emotional and intellectual care that they focus on their students, it's not even in the same realm, right? Yeah. And so when I'm thinking about the teaching aspect, those pieces of your guys' identity will be so powerful in the world of education. Because you will have had to construct out of fucking misery and suffering, not in a bad way, but like that's what this system has to offer for those of us that are not privileged from the age of like 15, right? And so, but out of that misery and suffering, you're going to be way stronger in your mechanisms than many of the people that get through without, because you'll have metacognitive understanding of those concepts. And then 2, that's such a powerful pull. Like you can leverage that to do some really amazing things for the least privileged people in our education system.
Really simple example of that is when I was reading those blog posts for the podcast, where I actually just define words that are not like obvious, because that's the reality. Because if anyone were to ever learn what it means to be disciplined, they would have had to learn that. But for people who have never had to learn the word discipline, if I just read it and just continue on, that creates a barrier for them to understand what the heck I'm trying to say. So that's just a small example, but yes, thank you, Jeff, for betting on us.
It's always big time, guys.
Just wanted to add, like what I think what really resonates with me in my head, or the word that just pops up, is like empathy. I feel like you're probably like, I don't think I've met a professor who's more empathetic and like tries to step into the lives of their students. Like I've had some nice professors, but not someone like student-centered, not in the sense of just their education, but just the student as a person themselves. And I think like that's such a powerful tool, because I don't think education should just be like just thought of as just education, because I think the whole being of the person kind of comes into that and plays a role. Like what's happening in your life is gonna affect your education. So I'm glad that you've kind of led us into that school of thought, or like, yeah.
It's a big one, dude. Like, and the sad thing about it is that our entire society is not structured in a way that values this. And so one of the things that I really want to protect you guys against is the farther you go, the more you're going to be convinced, I suppose, that like falling in line. So an example of this is like, so let's take one of our favorite authors, Cal Newport. That guy's whole paradigm, he's not talking about how he changed students' life, right? He's selling a concept of hyperproductivity for personal economic gain. Like, he's not talking about system transformation. He's not talking about racism. He's not talking about like he's talking about if you have a hierarchical system and you want to be at the pinnacle of that system, how do you do it? But under that system is the pain and suffering of so many, like the inequities of our entire society are encapsulated in that system. And I think, you know, one of the things that's really hard about this social structure is we don't actually value teaching because it's way less easy to measure the output of a teacher than it is to measure the output of an individual. So, and the entire capital structure of the United States is based on consumerism, right? And so if you can produce goods that have some tangible exchange value that allows for people, the capital, the flow between people, that's good for our society. But nowhere in this relationship or in the relationship between teacher and student, you know, at a private school, that's a different situation. But at a public institution, that relationship is not based on the exchange of goods. That relationship is based on the empowering of the next generation. And so, and, you know, the stronger your minds are, the harder it is for people in power to manipulate and to control you. Right? Because you'll look at the statements of those people and be able to like see right through it. And if you know, that's one of the people who have a lot of power. It's not like the reason that they have a lot of power is they crave to fill some need, right? So they're not like, oh yeah, I have a lot of power, let me give it away. Like, they often ask themselves, like, how do I maintain this? And that's one of the things that as a teacher that I find is really, really important. And then I think like it is super valuable, but one of the things that you guys are, well, one of the things I face on a daily basis is I have to remember to focus that value for myself and really like advocate for that in my professional life. And it's not, I would be a way richer man if I forgot those lessons. I would have more benefit in my own education and my own career if I had bought into the message that I should focus on my own productivity rather than on focusing on others. My claim is you could do both, right? But if you force me on a day-to-day basis, I'm gonna center the educational experience and then work in the background on the back burner on advocating for personal benefit.
That was so powerful, Jeff. I want to clip that and have it as my ringtone or something. That was, I'm really glad you shared that, Steve. That pinnacle that Jeff is talking about of people underlying that system. Just think about all those students that came into office hours and stayed overtime over our summer. I'm almost positive they weren't the top finishing grades in our course, right? Because we had some. I mean, you saw those final projects. Some of those people coded the circuit board to play Mozart. So that's not right. But as far as if we define learning as change, we saw what those students were exerting, right? Every single day after class, multiple hours, right? So.
Well, and then also how you were mentioning just kind of how people in positions of power, especially like in academia, you can kind of be an asshole and have this like superiority complex. And it's pretty interesting because when I was reading the book, I was recommending, or not recommending, but saying like maybe some students should go out into the work world before getting their PhD, because they kind of, well, assuming like they're like 22 and whatnot, they're young, but they still like, because it's really common for people entering the PhD to kind of have like their inferior and then their mentor, the people like, or their professors are like the superior, and they kind of are scared to break that like relation or that like kind of ideology. And when you go to work, you kind of realize a little bit more of your value, and you realize like, hey, I'm paying for this, or I'm investing my time, and I want to make this education worth it. So you're more likely to advocate for yourself. And I just thought, I was like, I feel like I'm already at that step because I've already had Jeff whispering that in my ear for the last 2-3, like, advocate for yourself, you know, you're worth it, like, you deserve this, fuck that professor, like, do what you have to do to get, like, to help yourself. You're paying them, like, I always have that in the back of my mind, so I feel like what you're doing, it's working, because, like, I feel like that's an example of me already, like, learning and not having to go through that step. Like, I think I've already kind of developed that mindset, or like I'm working on it, but yeah.
It takes active work to not become a jerk in these systems because the scoreboard's messed up, right? Even in Newport's podcast, he literally says, because the scoreboard's so messed up, we're conditioning people to become jerks or self-centered, right? I mean, just think about how competitive it is, right? And that extends beyond academia for sure. But
and advocating for yourself, and like all while like staying polite, like not just outright going to a professor like, hey, I'm paying your bills, like you better give me this, but like, you know, just be courteous, but still knowing your worth.
Yeah, I mean, I don't fault. One thing that's amazing is the compassion that comes out of this. Like when I look at high-powered professors, I don't fault them for their lack of interest in student success and their lack of empathy for students. They're doing the most rational thing. And there's, you know, if there's a lot, I mean, that's a systemic problem, right? Like if you tell people, if you celebrate people for particular behavior and then they fall into that behavior, we shouldn't get mad at that person for falling into that trap, right? Where you should, yeah.
Jeff, you saw those messages I wrote to the executive director of MESA and the president and the dean? They said the same thing, that all of them, basically their response was that it's just too bad that society, like, deepest, sincerest sympathies for professors and people in education, because that's not what we're valuing as a society, which is sad, right? And then I had asked the question, as a first-year registered voter, where can I get more educated to get more funding into education? But they didn't get to my question, so I'll keep that question for myself.
They
got the power.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Okay, we have what, 20 minutes? I'm thinking, Steve, well, we have some options here. We can talk a little bit about what your experience was like publishing your first blog. We can talk a little bit about trust and friendship when it comes to our writing and our media. And we could also make some time to do a short reaction video of Jeff's talk. So Steve, actually, why don't you go ahead and just share a little bit about what your thoughts were on your first blog post, because I want to hear about that.
Okay. Well, the hardest part for me was just letting go, because I don't really have social media. I don't have like an online footprint. I'm just, I don't know, paranoid person. So I just letting go, and kind of like me being the author of that and accepting it, and like I know I can get judged for it, but that felt really good. And then it's about asking questions, and kind of like, I feel like that's always been a problem for me, like just the anxiety of either whether it's going to office hours or asking a question in a giant lecture hall. And I know I always kept in the back of my head, like Jeff told me, like kind of treat Foothill like you're training for it, because it's a smaller class, the professors are nicer, so like, you know, I can build up those skills. Now, when I go to a giant lecture hall, like I kind of have a little bit more confidence, or I know what it takes to go seek out the professor. Like I'm not going from 0 to 100. I've kind of built up the skills. And now that I've kind of just let go and put that blog out, I kind of want to do a video, because I know there's this guy on YouTube. His name is like Boots to Books, and he was just in the military. He's an older student, maybe like late 20s or early 30s, and he was just in the undergrad, and he was going through his math. He's not like any crazy math student. He's just a regular guy trying to go through his math undergraduate, talking about his experiences. And I'm like, I could do that. And I think it's kind of interesting, like some of the comments that he gets, just like people who are also interested in math and in the same process. And I just thought it was a really cool way of him documenting his experience. And I'm like, I could do that because now I'm like, I could talk about me planning, trying to get into grad school, trying to get a research thesis for my undergraduate, just trying to apply to programs. Like, I think not necessarily like that I have the answers, but just me going through it and being naive and trying to figure things out. But I think I kind of want to try a video format, but I think the blog definitely helps with, like, it would help me on what I would say in that video, because I made the outline, then I made the blog, and then I make the video. So I kind of want to release a video attached to my next blog. I think it'd be a pretty valuable step. So yeah.
I think so too, Steve. Just real quick, the pursuits of research and going to graduate school, there are literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of students in this nation who have no idea what that means, right? And because they have no idea what that means,
I'm one of them.
I didn't know what that meant a year ago, right? So let's not aim for a million views. Let's just aim to document for ourselves so that we can be metacognitive about our experiences, and whoever that we want to point to those resources, we can, right? I would like to allocate 10 minutes on the reaction video, but that gives us about 5 to talk about. Jeff, whatever you want to talk about, but we could definitely talk about the trust and friendship note in your YouTube Kindling doc.
Yeah, let's, what would you prefer to do first?
Maybe we'll do the reaction video first. It's a little bit easier of a task. Okay, so I have it queued up. The fact that this video has only sub 200 views is sad. Just like how Susan Ambrose in her workshop has sub 1,000 views, right? So that's kind of telling. Okay, share computer sound. And then, okay. Steve, have you gotten a chance to watch this video? Because if not, you're about to be in for a surprise.
I don't think I have seen this.
You haven't seen this one? I've only watched this one about 7 times already, so especially the first 25 minutes. Okay, hopefully it's going to share sound. I'm going to try play. If it doesn't share sound, you can just signal that it's not sharing sound, okay? So what we're going to do is basically watch 1.5 minutes, and I'm going to end it, and then we'll have a discussion on how students might apply what Jeff is advising the instructors in the room to do for their classes for themselves.
Well, I may have seen this actually.
Okay, all right, I'm going to try.
If you tell me a truth that is yours that I don't care about and I don't know the evidence of, I probably will forget it. If you tell me a truth in a classroom setting and show me the evidence, I may remember for some time. But if you put me in a position where I discover that truth for myself in a space that matters to me, my life, and my future dreams, that truth is forever mine. When I think about my classes in linear algebra, one of the things that I want to do is position my students to learn linear algebra through a lens of their own dreams. In particular, allow them to study that theory by introducing them to ideas that they want to study in their future and contextualizing the entire curriculum through their own hopes and their own vision. This project is the second in a long series. I have at least 8 more in the queue, in which I'm trying to redesign the linear algebra class to have a choose your own adventure component. In any linear algebra.
Okay, Steve, have you seen that clip?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Awesome. Steve, I'll let you go ahead and start. I have so much to say on the advice that Jeff is presenting here. Not advice, maybe philosophy that he's presenting here. If I can learn how to end my share screen. Oh, here it is. Okay. So I think it might be interesting to share how might students channel what Jeff is saying for these instructors for themselves in their courses. And you might not have been able to capture everything that he said, but just your first take.
Just making content relevant to their lives and like have an outside application. I mean, it's kind of refreshing sometimes when you understand what you can do with something. I think it makes it easier to stick. Yeah.
One thing I can say is, especially this quarter, because I'm taking 4 CS courses, I've never done that before, I really recognize so many of my professors invest in the classroom time to nerd out on STEM concepts or to say things that they've said for many, many times over many, many terms. So that really means if we know anything that we've learned about learning, that is not us actively learning anything when that's happening, when they're geeking out about something. I mean, it's cool that they're geeking out about it, right? Because they're genuinely interested and some of that might rub off. But usually by the time they're geeking out about something, I already had like 20 to 30 questions that were prerequisites to understanding their joke or understanding what they're saying. So I can't really appreciate that moment of them smiling at themselves when they're talking about something. So in other words, when Jeff is saying that if he as an instructor can position students so that they can discover truths or discover the beauty behind some of these concepts in STEM, then they might be able to remember that more. I would say Jeff has actually given that advice for his students and us as a cohort by focusing on the process, because if we don't focus in on the process, we actually aren't positioning ourselves to discover the truths that are behind the subject matters at hand. So that's one thing I wanted to share about that. Jeff?
So one of the things that comes up, what you just said, actually, there have been studies at how bad education is, or a lecture is for education. There's a really great one. Let me see if I can get the name of it. It's very, very well known in certain realms. My program evaluation, maybe I can come back on that. There's a really, really good study. They did like a metacognitive study of like 200 research papers. And the conclusion of the study is like one sentence. We have scientifically validated we should really move on to the second generation, which is if we don't lecture, what should we do instead? So one of the issues, like what you just said, there are studies, I would like to name it if I can, because if we can name it, then people that are stuck in the lecture-based model at least can have a separate look at. Maybe if we could write this down at the next meeting, because I can go back and actually get the name of this thing. It's a famous paper. I think it was in the National Academy of Sciences. And in, anyways, the point of that though, like what you're saying, I agree. The only person learning a lot is the teacher, right? Because every time they lecture, they're re-triggering their own concept images and they're actually myelinating their own brain, right? But for everybody else in the room, it's a passive environment. Like it's literally not a learning environment. It's more of a expectation communication mechanism, right? They're just saying like, I expect you to know this stuff. Because to actually learn takes, for the amount of content, it's physically impossible to make the kind of connections in the brain that's required. And so one of the points of that particular talk is to say, oh, and then the second thing is a lot of times the theoretical approach to learning is really nice, assuming we don't have video and assuming that we don't have access to really, really rich environments outside. So in the 1600s, when the only thing that existed was a horse and some parchment paper, like it's a really great way to lecture, right? But in the 2000s, it's asinine that we're doing that. And we're forcing all of our students to have the exact same experience in the class, even though not all of our students have the exact same interests. You know, the sad thing is the moment that a teacher actually takes that challenge seriously, they'll realize that, oh my God, education is way harder than just lecturing, right? But that, you know, as a student, one of the things that I think is really important is to push the university to give you answers. And, you know, I can't tell you how many times I asked those questions and I got either, I don't know the answer to that, or why are you asking these questions? Stop doing that, just do what we tell you. And I think, you know, one of the things that I would say from the student's perspective is if I, as a student, have a really, really strong interest in something, don't take the words of authority as the final answer, right? The fact of the matter is most of us have an idea or some inkling of the type of thing that we want out of our institutions. But when we go ask those questions, then the institution give us negative results, you know, like, oh, we don't have an answer to that. Like a lot of professors don't have the answer of how this is applied because they've never learned themselves, right? They know the theory and they have some tangential knowledge of how to apply the material. But in terms of like no professor on earth knew Google's PageRank algorithm prior to Sergey Brin and Larry Page because nobody had discovered it, right? That's an application of eigenvalue theory translated into linear systems. All that stuff was known and how to do it was known, but how to apply it in that particular constant was all unknown. They got the GRFS. Those guys got the graduate research fellowship from the NSF, right? To create the PageRank algorithm. That was one of the things that NSF invested in. They created Google, so to speak. They were the first round of funding for that technology. But like, if those two people had not been really insistent and had not really put bounds of at Stanford, they would never have constructed Google. I'm not claiming that the funding mechanism that launched Google is a necessary outcome from that discovery. Those are two separate things. But my point is, students sometimes forget how much agency they have in the student-teacher relationship. Student is recognize that if you have some desired outcome from your education that has to do with how do you apply the knowledge in practice in your particular field, keep that, you know, imagine that question, that project of figuring out how to apply this stuff as a plant and every nutrients in the soils. And sometimes you're going to go, you know, sometimes you get buffeted by rain or by a hurricane, or, you know, which is the professor's telling you you're crazy or whatever, right? But at the end of the day, this is our education. It's not their education. What they're doing is they're providing the foundation, you know, some foundational knowledge, but it's really us that creates that value there. And I think systemically speaking, from system transformation, I would challenge other professors to find ways to integrate that type of thinking into their classes. I'm currently doing that in my quote unquote research career. But from the student's perspective, until that systemic transformation happens, I would say, you know, believe in yourself and believe in your questions, and then really push the institution, and don't take no for an answer, right? That doesn't mean to flip off the instructor and tell them that, you know, their mother grew up in a gutter and their father's a pig, right? That you don't have to be disrespectful about it. But if one professor doesn't have the answer, recognize that A, maybe that person doesn't know the answer to that question, or B, the incentives of that person's career have blocked them from taking your question seriously. You know, and the way that I always think about this is, do we pay, what do we pay for in our society? Do we pay for A's in calculus classes? I mean, scholarships, I guess, but if you look at the stuff that gets really, really celebrated, it's people that leverage old ideas in new ways. Right. And so from that standpoint, like, so much of the challenge of education, I think, is for students to figure out new and creative ways to apply old knowledge to solve new problems, right? To combine different types of knowledge in a way that is kind of unique, right? That's where the kind of the fertile ground lays. And by definition, that means most of your teachers have no idea how to do that, because their job is not, let me synthesize new ideas. And in fact, that it's such a higher barrier to entry than producing small incremental updates on old theories. It is such a higher barrier to entry to figure out how to apply something to a completely new context than it is to take an existing theory and improve it a little bit, right? And so I think from that standpoint, like if I was to speak to a student and to say, like, you know, how do you leverage that idea of filtering content through your own paradigms, the thing that I would say is, like, one, start to track your questions, like Steve's blog post says, right? Like really start treating your questions as important. And then two, challenge authority. Not, that challenge doesn't have to put your own navigation of the system at risk necessarily, right? It doesn't mean like you challenge authority and flip them off and really like make an adversary out of somebody that could be an advocate. But it does mean recognize that you as a student, you make your own education. And if you're not getting the answers from a particular person, that doesn't mean your question is invalid or that the desire for your answer to that question is a bad desire. It means the question is probably a valuable one. It's just, if somebody else had found the answer, you would find that online, right? You'd find access to that information somewhere. And I think that's, you know, just to hold that part of your heart and recognize, to be able to say in the face of an authority figure, like, this is valuable and I want to find an answer.
Wow. I'll add one last thing to that. So if I was speaking to a student who's struggling to understand how to make sense of lecture, I might actually compare lecture to going to a stand-up comedian show. But if you don't have the prerequisite knowledge of the let's say pop culture in what they're about to present and say, you're not going to get any of the jokes at all. And it's going to be absolutely miserable. Like literally people are laughing in Zoom classes. People are usually are participating in the Zoom chat box. And then 75 minutes is over and you're done. So to defend against that, revisit your lecture notes, try to capture as much as you can in lecture, whether it be questions or whether it be notes, and before the next class. That is your crash course education to be able to get the quote unquote metaphorical jokes that your professor is dropping on you in the actual lecture.
Such a big one. That's a great analogy, right? And also that really does challenge the concept of like, it brings it to a head. You know, I do, let's finish this because I think it's important. So this is one of those situations I'm trying to remember, right? I'm trying to remember this theory. And lo and behold, there it is. That's the paper.
Active learning increases student performance in science, engineering, and mathematics.
Yep. And then who's the first author there?
Scott Freeman.
Okay, so let me just read. So did you see how fast that was for me to find that? How long did that take? Yeah, that's why I like hard pieces of paper. So the results raise questions. Here's the main: to test the hypothesis that lecturing maximizes learning and course performance, we meta-analyzed 225 studies that reported data on examination scores or failure rates when comparing student performance in undergraduate STEM classes under traditional lecturing versus active learning. We did some statistical analysis, and results of this study announcing as a control in research studies and support active learning as the preferred empirically validated teaching practice in regular classrooms. In other words, lecture is scientifically validated as a very dumb way to teach. We should do active learning. And later in the, like, that's what the paper has in control in future experience. In other words, what does the Hippocratic Oath say? First, do no harm. We have an analysis of 225 peer-reviewed research papers that show lecturing is actually doing harm to students, right? So if you now use lecture to do experiments on learning, that's the equivalent of a doctor knowing that a drug is going to hurt somebody and still administering the drug anyways, right? And this gets into the idea of a novice teacher. The reason that people teach using lecture is not because they know it does harm. In fact, they are completely blind. They are willfully blind, not on purpose. They just, and the reason why I say willfully is these are some of the smartest people in the world. These people know how to learn. How is it that they get paid to be professional educators and they can't read lecture notes on how learning works? Well, that's a system of incentives that's designed to propagate a broken learning environment. But the point of this thing, and there's tons of these like this. That's why I wanted to expose you guys super early in your traditional thing. So the last thing, I'll shut up on this, but instead of using lecture as a control in experiments, it may be more productive to focus on what we call second generation research, using advances in educational psychology and cognitive science to inspire changes in course design, then testing hypotheses about which type of acting learning is most appropriate and efficient for certain topics and student populations. Well, guess what this is designed to do for you?
Exactly that.
Our learning, you guys are getting, you're getting access to educational psychology and cognitive science. I'm already on the second generation problem, and I have, that talk that I gave is about 10 years into my research and development. So I have a particular hypothesis about the best answer for the type of active learning. And that has to do with both this realization, this is I would call a foundational realization, and then also understanding of motivational theory and how interest develops and all that stuff. So the talk actually is well beyond my published scholarship. So in order to understand that talk, there's probably at least 5, but more like 10 papers that I should write contextualizing that. But my feeling is it's the development of those resources is much, much harder than that's more on that later. But part of the learning code is not only for the students that are going to benefit from that. We're leveraging cognitive science and psychology to teach them how to become professional learners. But for you two guys, one of the reasons that I say that you're going to be thought leaders is you guys are going to you will become knowledgeable, you'll become educated in that space as part of your education. So not only are you becoming content experts, and not only do you have that to offer, but you're double professionals. You actually understand the learning science and you understand how that relates. And so when you make pedagogical decisions, you do so from an informed.
Jeff?
And we hire professors and we say that this is the best education. Hello?
You're lagging.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's not
am I here?
You're frozen and your audio's choppy.
Maybe, I think you could see if you could turn off your video. Maybe we could hear the rest of your audio.
Is that better?
For now, yeah. But you could also turn it back on and try.
Yeah, I just this is a thing that
No.
A research proposal, let's say it's still happening.
Still happening.
Yeah. How is this a little better?
Yeah, the audio is okay now. If I guess when your video's off.
Yeah, well, I'll make this. We can wrap up because I got some stuff. I'm sure you guys have stuff on your mind, and I have on my mind. But the point of this is that the process, learning and teaching, there's so much that goes in on it, and that I find that being able to walk the line between both of those fields, be a content expert, and then also having a deep knowledge of psychology and cognitive science results about how learning works. Those two things inform each other. And so one of the reasons that a lot of college education, a lot of college classes are so painful is you have one without the other. So you have people designing learning environments about using expertise in content with absolutely no information or insights into how the processes of learning works. And because they are blind to those features, they're creating actively harmful environments to students who are having to navigate that. And so the learning code process, the process of learning code is to arm students with knowledge, maybe more knowledge than teachers have, about how learning works so that they can protect themselves against the most harmful or detrimental features of those learning environments and navigate those systems. For future educators, I say the more educated we become on cognitive science and psychology, the more we can leverage those results to transform our own pedagogical approaches and really make meaningful changes to the way that we teach our classes that benefit students. I have my own theories about this. I've only broken the tip of the iceberg because I'm not remunerated as a professional researcher at my work at our community college, right? If I only taught one class a quarter with full TA-ships and I was able to do 6 hours of research a day, I would have written 18 papers on this by this point, right? Yeah, so more on that later.
Yeah. If you're a student and trying to navigate the system, please visit Conquering College. In particular, maybe lecture note systems.
The learning code.
Well, I mean, we don't have one on lecture note systems yet, Jeff. So for them to be able to catch their professor's jokes or when their professor nerds out on these really beautiful STEM concepts, it requires you to have a lecture note system. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting through every single lecture, face palming yourself like I have done for so long. Okay, to-dos maybe?
Oh, yeah.
So October 2nd, which is Friday of this week, I will have published my post on autonomy. And then Jeff, if you want, you can send us a commentable draft of your post for the following week that Steve and I can provide comments to. Steve,
Awesome.
I think you're already beginning your research on your next blog post. I think this entire meeting is technically your research on your next blog post. And I was wondering if you wanted to, we could talk about this later, but you can timestamp this meeting because there was so many like golden nuggets in this meeting that would be really valuable for our YouTube and Spotify page.
I can timestamp it.
You can try and see how long that takes.
Okay. I mean, I could try. Cool.
Anything
At some point,
else?
I would love to timestamp one because I want to learn how to do it. Yeah, but not this
Maybe the
time
next
around.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Awesome.
Any last words from you two?
Good work, guys. Si se puede. Jiao yo.
Yeah. All right. See you all next week.
All right, guys.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye.
Steve?
Did you have a project